The thunder of gunshots echoed across Springerville, Arizona, sending a flock of startled ravens into the sky as Hazel Harper collapsed to the ground, blood seeping through her fingers as she clutched her shoulder. The year was 1885, and Hazel had just made the grave mistake of telling Randall Whitaker that she wouldn't be selling her father's land to the mining company he represented. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. "You stubborn fool," Whitaker snarled, the smoking Colt still aimed at her trembling form. "Last chance, Miss Harper. Sign the papers, or the next bullet finds your heart." The gathered crowd on Main Street scattered like mice before a cat, ducking behind water troughs and diving through batwing doors. All except one man, Nathaniel Xavier, who stood motionless at the edge of the boardwalk, his weathered hand hovering inches from the revolver on his hip. His ice-blue eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his dusty Stetson as he watched the scene unfold. Hazel, despite the pain radiating through her body, managed to lift her chin defiantly. "I'd rather die standing than live on my knees, Whitaker. My father built that ranch with his bare hands, and I won't let you tear it apart for copper." Whitaker's face contorted with rage as he cocked the hammer of his pistol. Have it your way. The next few moments seemed to unfold in slow motion. Nathaniel drew his revolver with lightning speed, his bullet finding Whitaker's gun hand before the villain could squeeze his trigger. The mining company man howled in pain as his weapon clattered to the dirt. Before Whitaker could react further, Nathaniel closed the distance between them, driving his fist into the man's jaw with such force that Whitaker sprawled backward into the horse trough. "You made a mistake," Nathaniel said, his voice low and dangerous. "The kind men don't walk away from in these parts." Hazel's vision blurred as she fought to remain conscious, the world tilting dangerously around her. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the concerned face of Nathaniel Xavier kneeling beside her, his calloused hands gentle as they checked her wound. "Stay with me, Miss Harper," he murmured, though his words seemed to come from far away. "Help's coming. Just hold on." When Hazel next opened her eyes, she found herself lying in an unfamiliar bed, sunlight streaming through lace curtains. The sharp scent of medicinal herbs hung in the air, mingling with the aroma of brewing coffee. Her shoulder throbbed with a dull ache, but the burning pain had subsided. A bandage wrapped tightly around her upper body restricted her movement. "Well now, look who's decided to rejoin the living," came a woman's cheerful voice. Hazel turned her head to see Martha Sullivan, the town's midwife and closest thing Springerville had to a doctor, bustling into the room with a steaming mug. "How long have I been asleep?" Hazel asked, her voice raspy from disuse. "Nearly 2 days," Martha replied, helping her sit up enough to sip the bitter willow bark tea. "That bullet took a nasty chunk out of you, but it passed clean through. You're lucky an inch to the left and we'd be picking out a dress for your burial." The memory of the shooting flooded back. "Whitaker, in Sheriff Connolly's jail," Martha said firmly. "Though if Mr. Xavier had his way, that man would be swinging from the old oak by now." She adjusted Hazel's pillows. "That cowboy hasn't left the porch since he brought you here, refuses to go further than shouting distance. Says he's worried Whitaker's friends might come to finish what he started." Hazel felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with her fever. "I don't even know him. Why would he help me?" Martha's eyes twinkled. "Some men still believe in doing what's right, dear. Though I suspect there might be more to it than that. He's been asking about you, how long you've been running the ranch alone, whether you have family coming to help." She patted Hazel's good arm. "Seems mighty interested for a drifter passing through." Later that afternoon, when Hazel had managed to stay awake for more than a few minutes at a stretch, a soft knock came at the door. Martha ushered in Nathaniel Xavier, his tall frame awkwardly filling the doorway of the small bedroom. He'd cleaned up since the shooting, his dark hair still damp from washing, his usual trail dust absent from his denim shirt and canvas pants. In his hands, he nervously turned the brim of his hat. "Miss Harper," he said with a nod. "Good to see you sitting up." "Mr. Xavier," Hazel replied, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. "I understand I have you to thank for my life." He shrugged uncomfortably. "Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," she said softly. "You did." A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. "Sheriff says Whitaker works for the Copper Canyon Mining Company," Nathaniel finally said. "They've been buying up ranches all through the territory. Some folks say they don't take no for an answer." Hazel's jaw tightened. "They've been after my land for months. My father found copper deposits in the North Ridge before he died last winter, but he made me promise never to sell. Said that land was meant to sustain generations of Harpers, not be hollowed out and abandoned." Nathaniel nodded thoughtfully. "Whitaker won't be holding a gun again anytime soon, but his boss, a man named Sullivan, he's not known for giving up easily. Word around town is that he's arriving on tomorrow's stage." Fear fluttered in Hazel's chest. "I can't defend the ranch like this." She gestured to her injured shoulder. "No," Nathaniel agreed, "you can't." He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Which is why I'm offering to stay on until you're healed up. I've worked plenty of ranches, know my way around cattle and horses both." Hazel studied him. Nathaniel Xavier was a stranger, a drifter by all accounts. Yet something in his steady gaze made her trust him. Maybe it was the way he'd stepped forward when everyone else stepped back, or perhaps it was simple necessity she needed help, and he was offering it. "I can't pay much," she warned. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Room and board will do for now. Plus, I've got my own reasons for wanting to see Copper Canyon mining put in their place." Before Hazel could question him further, Martha returned with a tray of food. "That's enough business talk for today. This girl needs rest if she's going to heal." Nathaniel backed toward the door. "I'll head out to your ranch this evening, Miss Harper. Tend to your stock and make sure everything's secure." "The key is under the third plank on the porch," Hazel told him. "And Mr. Xavier, thank you." He nodded once, then was gone, leaving Hazel with questions swirling in her mind about the mysterious cowboy who'd appointed himself her protector. 2 days later, Martha deemed Hazel well enough to return home, though with strict instructions to avoid strenuous activity. Sheriff Connolly arrived with his wagon to transport her, his weathered face creased with concern. "Whitaker's being transferred to the territorial prison tomorrow," he informed her as they rattled along the dusty road leading to Harper Ranch. "Attempted murder's a serious charge. He'll be facing a judge in Prescott come month's end." "And his boss, Sullivan?" Hazel asked. The sheriff's expression darkened. "Arrived yesterday. Smooth-talking snake if ever I met one. Claims Whitaker was acting on his own, that the company never authorized violence." He spat over the side of the wagon. "Load of horse apples, if you ask me, but there's nothing I can hold him on." When they crested the final hill overlooking her property, Hazel was surprised to see smoke rising from the chimney of the ranch house. The cattle were properly penned, the horses groomed and contentedly munching hay in the corral. Even more surprising was the sight of freshly split firewood stacked neatly against the barn, and repairs started on the sagging front porch. Nathaniel emerged from the barn as they pulled up, wiping his hands on a rag. For a moment, seeing him there amidst her father's life's work, something caught in Hazel's throat, a feeling of rightness she hadn't expected. "Place looks better than it has in months," she admitted as he helped her down from the wagon. A hint of pride crossed his face. Fixed the leaky roof in the barn and mended the break in the north pasture fence. Your cattle had been wandering off." Sheriff Connolly glanced between them with knowing eyes. "Well, looks like you're in good hands, Miss Harper. I'll be heading back to town." After the sheriff departed, Nathaniel helped Hazel into the house. The interior was spotless, floors swept, dishes washed. Even her father's old armchair had been repaired where the stuffing had begun to escape. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, genuinely moved. "Figured you'd heal better in a tidy house," he replied simply. "Made up a bed for myself in the barn. Don't worry, I've kept a proper distance." "Nonsense," Hazel said firmly. "There's a perfectly good spare room. My father would roll in his grave if I made his ranch's savior sleep with the horses." That evening, they shared a simple meal of rabbit stew that Nathaniel had prepared. As dusk fell over the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, they sat on the porch watching the first stars appear. "You said you had your own reasons for wanting to see Copper Canyon mining stopped," Hazel ventured. "What did you mean?" Nathaniel was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, as though the words came from a place he rarely visited. "Had a small spread in Colorado. Nothing fancy, just enough land to raise some horses and live peacefully." His jaw tightened. "Copper Canyon wanted it for a railway spur line to their new mine. When I refused to sell, accidents started happening. First my barn burned, then my well got poisoned." His eyes had gone cold with the memory. "Final straw was when they stampeded a herd through my breeding stock. Lost everything I'd worked 5 years to build." "I'm sorry," Hazel whispered. "By the time I took them to court, they'd already bought the judge, lost the land anyway." He turned to look at her, determination hardening his features. "I've been following them since, watching their pattern. They're working their way through Arizona now, using the same tactics." "Is that why you were in Springerville? You were tracking them?" He nodded. "I aim to gather enough evidence of their methods to take to the territorial governor. Man like that, with political ambitions, would be mighty interested in a company using violence and intimidation across the territory." Hazel considered this. "My land could be the proof you need. If Sullivan makes another move against me." "It's dangerous," Nathaniel warned. "These men don't hesitate to kill when crossed." She touched her bandaged shoulder. "I'm already aware of their methods, Mr. Xavier, but I won't be bullied off my father's land." Something like admiration flickered in his eyes. "Then we'll stand together." In the days that followed, Hazel regained her strength while Nathaniel worked the ranch. They fell into an easy rhythm, he handling the physically demanding chores, while she managed the books, and directed the overall operation from the porch or kitchen table. Despite her independent nature, Hazel found herself enjoying his company, his quiet competence, and the way he listened intently when she spoke of her hopes for the ranch's future. A week after her return home, they received their first visitor from Copper Canyon Mining. Sullivan himself arrived in a fine carriage, dressed impeccably in an Eastern suit that seemed out of place in the rugged landscape. He was younger than Hazel had expected, perhaps 35, with calculating eyes and a practiced smile. "Miss Harper," he greeted her, removing his hat as he approached the porch where she sat mending a shirt. "I cannot express how deeply troubled I am by Mr. Whitaker's actions. I've come personally to assure you that he was acting completely outside company directives." Nathaniel emerged from the barn, casually positioning himself where he could watch the exchange while continuing to repair a saddle. "Is that so?" Hazel replied coolly. "Strange, since he mentioned your name specifically when making threats." Sullivan's smile didn't waver. "Desperate men say desperate things. I assure you, Copper Canyon Mining operates with the utmost integrity." He gestured to her injury. "I'd like to offer compensation for your medical expenses as a goodwill gesture." "That's mighty generous," Hazel said, "considering your company has no legal responsibility if Whitaker truly acted alone." A flash of something dangerous crossed Sullivan's face before his pleasant mask returned. "We value community relations, Miss Harper." "Then you'll understand that my answer about selling remains the same." She set down her mending and met his gaze steadily. "This land isn't for sale, not at any price." Sullivan's eyes flicked briefly to Nathaniel, then back to her. "I see you've hired help. Times must be difficult." "Mr. Xavier is a valued friend," she replied. "Friends come and go, Miss Harper, but debts—" Sullivan smiled thinly. "Debts have a way of remaining. I understand the bank holds your mortgage. Would be a shame if they were to call in the note early." Nathaniel stepped forward, setting down the saddle. "Sounds an awful lot like a threat, Sullivan." The mining executive regarded him with calculated indifference. "Simply an observation on the precarious nature of ranching these days." He turned back to Hazel. "My offer stands at double the market value for one more week. After that." He shrugged. "Well, the copper isn't going anywhere, but opportunities have a way of expiring." After Sullivan's departure, Hazel's hands trembled with suppressed rage. The gall of that man! Nathaniel's expression was grim. "We need to visit the bank tomorrow. If Sullivan's planning to pressure them about your mortgage, we should know where you stand." The next morning found them in the office of Harold Jennings, Springerville's bank manager. A nervous man with thinning hair who kept adjusting his spectacles as he reviewed Hazel's account. "Well, Miss Harper, your father was quite current on his payments before his passing, and you've maintained them admirably since." He cleared his throat. "However, there is a clause that allows the note to be called in full upon change of ownership." "But there's been no change of ownership," Hazel protested. "The ranch passed directly to me through my father's will." Jennings squirmed uncomfortably. "Yes, well, technically the death of the primary borrower constitutes a change. We've been lenient thus far, but—" "But Sullivan's been to see you," Nathaniel finished. The banker's face reddened. "Mr. Sullivan did mention that his company has significant deposits with our institution, yes. But I assure you—" "How much?" Hazel interrupted. "How much to pay off the mortgage completely?" When Jennings named the sum, her heart sank. It was far more than she had set aside, especially after the poor cattle prices of the previous season. Outside the bank, Hazel leaned against the hitching post, fighting back tears of frustration. $2,000 might as well be $20,000. "I don't have it." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "There might be a way," he said slowly. "The cattle drive to Prescott is coming up. Beef prices are high this year with all the new settlers." Hope flickered within her. "But I can't drive cattle with this shoulder, and hiring enough men would eat most of the profit." "I've led drives before," he said, "and I know some trustworthy men in the area who'd work for a fair wage. If we combine your herd with some from neighboring ranches who can't make the drive alone, we could turn a proper profit." Hazel studied his face. "Why would you do this for me, Nathaniel? You barely know me." Something softened in his eyes when she used his given name. "Maybe I'm tired of watching good people lose everything to men like Sullivan. Or maybe—" He hesitated. "Maybe there's something about you that makes me want to stay a while longer." The warmth in his voice sent a flutter through her chest that had nothing to do with her injury. For the first time since her father's death, Hazel felt as though she wasn't facing the world entirely alone. Organizing the cattle drive consumed the next 2 weeks. Nathaniel rode to neighboring ranches, securing agreements from 3 smaller operations to combine herds for the journey to Prescott. Hazel worked from dawn until dusk, her shoulder healing enough to allow her to manage light duties around the ranch. Together they repaired equipment, planned the route, and calculated expenses. Their evenings together grew longer, filled with stories shared over coffee on the porch. Hazel learned that Nathaniel had grown up in Missouri, the son of a blacksmith who taught him to value honest work above all else. He'd fought briefly in the closing days of the Civil War, despite being barely 16, then drifted west afterward, unable to settle in one place until he'd found his Colorado homestead. In turn, she told him about growing up on the ranch, her mother's death from fever when she was 12, and how her father had taught her every aspect of ranching, determined she would never be dependent on a husband's generosity to survive. "He sounds like a wise man," Nathaniel commented one evening as they watched the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. "He would have liked you," Hazel replied softly. "He always said you could judge a man by how he treats those who can offer him nothing in return." Their eyes met in the fading light, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of mutual respect that had blossomed into something deeper. The morning they were to begin gathering cattle for the drive, Sullivan returned to the ranch. This time he brought 4 men with him, all wearing guns prominently displayed. "Miss Harper," he called from the yard, not bothering to dismount, "I see you're preparing for a drive, ambitious considering your condition." Hazel stepped onto the porch, Nathaniel a solid presence beside her. "Mr. Sullivan, I don't recall inviting you onto my property." "I've come with a final offer," Sullivan said, ignoring her comment. "Given the bank's decision to review your mortgage, I thought you might reconsider my generous proposal." "The bank has given me until after the drive to settle accounts," she replied coldly. "And my answer remains the same." Sullivan's pleasant facade dropped. "You're making a mistake, Miss Harper. This drive won't happen. My company has acquired water rights to Diamond Creek, the only reliable water source on the trail to Prescott." He smiled thinly. "Attempting to water your cattle there would constitute trespassing." Nathaniel stepped forward. "Public water sources can't be claimed exclusively, Sullivan. The territorial court established that 3 years ago." "Ah, but Diamond Creek runs through private property now," Sullivan countered smoothly. "Property recently purchased by Copper Canyon Mining. I'm well within my rights to refuse access." Hazel felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Without Diamond Creek, the drive would have to take a longer, more dangerous route through Apache territory, adding days to the journey and putting both men and cattle at risk. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" she said bitterly. "Business requires foresight, Miss Harper." "Now, shall we discuss terms? My offer expires today." Before Hazel could respond, Nathaniel moved to stand between her and Sullivan. "We'll find another way. Now, unless you're here to purchase cattle, I suggest you leave." Sullivan's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You're making powerful enemies, Xavier. I know about your vendetta against my company. It won't end well for you this time either." With that parting threat, Sullivan and his men rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and an atmosphere heavy with unspoken danger. That night, after the ranch hands Nathaniel had hired arrived to prepare for the drive, Hazel found him standing alone by the corral, staring at the distant mountains illuminated by moonlight. "There's still Wild Horse Springs," she suggested, coming to stand beside him. "It's a harder trail, but Sullivan will have thought of that too," he interrupted gently. "Men like him don't leave things to chance." "Then what do we do?" Nathaniel turned to face her, his expression resolute. "There's a third route, not on any map, through Tonto Basin. The local Apache use it, but few white men know of it." Hazel's eyes widened. How do you know about it? Spent a winter with the Tonto Apache after I was wounded in '78, he explained. They took me in when they could have left me to die, taught me their paths through the mountains. Hope flickered within her. Will they allow us passage? Their chief, Delche, regards me as a brother. If I ride ahead tonight and speak with him, I believe he will grant us safe passage for a fair trade. He hesitated. But Sullivan can't know our plans. If word reaches him that we're attempting the drive at all, he'll do everything in his power to stop us. When do we leave? Hazel asked without hesitation. You're still healing, Nathaniel protested. The trail will be rough, and this is my ranch, my cattle, my future, she interrupted firmly. I'm coming. I can ride well enough now, and you'll need every hand you can get. The admiration in his eyes warmed her more than any fire could have. We leave at first light, he conceded. But you'll ride in the supply wagon until we reach Apache territory. She agreed, though they both knew she had no intention of being confined to a wagon for long. True to his word, Nathaniel rode ahead that very night to negotiate with the Apache, leaving Hazel and the 5 hired hands to begin gathering the combined herd. By dawn, they had nearly 300 head of cattle assembled, with more arriving from neighboring ranches throughout the morning. Nathaniel returned shortly after midday, his expression relieved. Delche has granted us passage. In exchange for 5 cattle and medicines from Prescott, they'll even provide guides through the most treacherous sections. One of the older hands, a man named Jenkins who had worked briefly for Hazel's father, spat into the dust. Trusting Apaches, that's a fool's errand, Xavier. It's our only chance to reach Prescott in time, Nathaniel replied evenly. And I'd trust Delche with my life. Have, in fact. Jenkins muttered something uncomplimentary, but didn't argue further. The cattle drive began the following morning under a sky-threatening rain, a mixed blessing in the arid territory. The first day passed without incident, the herd moving steadily along the lesser-known trails leading toward Tonto Basin. Hazel, despite her agreement to ride in the wagon, mounted her favorite mare by mid-morning, unable to bear watching others work while she sat idle. Nathaniel said nothing when he saw her riding alongside the herd, merely shaking his head with a resigned smile that made her heart skip a beat. That night, as they made camp beneath a rock overhang that provided natural shelter, Nathaniel shared his concerns with her privately. Sullivan's men were asking questions in town about our departure, he told her, keeping his voice low. They'll figure out soon enough that we've taken an unexpected route. Will they follow? Eventually. But the Apache trails are hard to track, and the coming rain will help cover our passage. He glanced at her shoulder. How are you holding up? Better than expected, she admitted, though I won't be roping any strays anytime soon. The fire's glow softened his features as he studied her face. You're remarkable, Hazel Harper. Most women would have sold that land months ago after what you've been through. Most women haven't had something worth fighting for, she replied softly. Their eyes held for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Nathaniel moved slightly closer, his hand finding hers in the shadows beyond the firelight. When this is over, he began hesitantly, I was thinking I might stay on. If you need a foreman, that is. Her heart raced at his words and the gentle pressure of his fingers against hers. I think that could be arranged, she whispered. Before he could respond, a shout from one of the night guards shattered the moment. Riders coming. 6, maybe 7 of them. Nathaniel was on his feet instantly, gun drawn. Get the men up, he ordered the nearest hand. Circle the wagons and get ready to move the herd if needed. Peering into the darkness, they could make out the approaching horsemen, too many for a casual encounter, too purposeful for travelers. Sullivan's men, Hazel said grimly, checking the revolver she kept in her belt. "Get to cover," Nathaniel told her firmly. "We don't know if they've spotted us yet." But it was too late. The leading rider fired a shot into the air, the sound echoing across the canyon walls. "Harper," a voice shouted. "We know you're there. Sullivan wants his property, his property." Hazel muttered incredulously. The audacity! The hired hands took defensive positions around the camp, weapons ready. Nathaniel's expression had gone cold and calculating. "They're trying to spook the herd," he observed. "If they scatter our cattle through this canyon, we'll lose half of them before morning." "What do we do?" Hazel asked. Before Nathaniel could answer, a different sound reached them, the distinctive bird call that wasn't a bird at all. Hazel had heard her father describe Apache signals often enough to recognize one. Nathaniel's face broke into a grim smile. "We wait," he said. Minutes later, war cries erupted from the ridges above. Delshay's warriors had been tracking the interlopers and chose this moment to make their presence known. Sullivan's men, suddenly realizing they were caught between the drive's defenders and an Apache war party, hesitated in confusion. Nathaniel seized the moment, stepping forward into the firelight where he could be clearly seen. "You've ridden onto Apache land without permission," he called out. "Delshay's warriors have you surrounded. Throw down your weapons if you want to live till morning." It was a bluff the Apache were unlikely to attack without provocation, but in the darkness, with unfamiliar war cries echoing around them, Sullivan's men couldn't know that. After a tense standoff, they reluctantly disarmed. By dawn, the situation had been resolved. Sullivan's men, thoroughly intimidated by their night surrounded by Apache warriors, were escorted away from the drive's path with a clear warning. The cattle were under Delshay's protection until they reached Prescott. "They'll report back to Sullivan," Nathaniel warned as they watched the chastened men ride away. "He'll be waiting in Prescott." "Let him wait," Hazel replied with new confidence. "By then, the cattle will be sold and the mortgage paid. He can't touch the ranch after that." The drive continued through Tonto Basin, guided by two of Delshay's most experienced warriors. The route was challenging narrow passes, steep descents, and sparse grazing, but the Apache knowledge of hidden water sources proved invaluable. Without their guidance, the herd would have suffered greatly in the scorching heat. Hazel's admiration for Nathaniel grew with each passing day. He seemed to anticipate problems before they arose, working tirelessly alongside the hired hands, never asking anyone to do what he wouldn't do himself. At night, when the camp quieted, they often sat together away from the others, talking in low voices about their hopes for the future. On the 6th night of the drive, as they camped in a sheltered valley, Nathaniel finally asked the question that had been on his mind since that first interrupted moment by the fire. "When this is over," he said quietly, "and Sullivan's been dealt with, what then, Hazel?" She studied his face in the moonlight, seeing the vulnerability beneath his strength. "What are you asking, Nathaniel?" He took a deep breath. "I'm asking if there might be a place for me in your life, not just on your ranch." Hazel's heart swelled with emotion she'd been trying to contain for weeks. "I think there might be," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "If that's what you want." "It is," he said simply, and when he leaned forward to kiss her, it felt like coming home after a long journey. The next morning, one of the Apache guides returned from scouting with troubling news. Sullivan had sent more men, professional gunfighters this time, who were waiting at Willow Creek, the last water crossing before Prescott. "How many?" Nathaniel asked grimly. 8 men, the guide replied. "Armed with rifles. They have built small walls of stone to hide behind." "An ambush, then." The narrow canyon at Willow Creek would force the herd to bunch together, making them easy targets for riflemen positioned above. "Can we go around?" Hazel asked, though she already suspected the answer. The Apache warrior shook his head. "No water for 2 days if you take another path. Cattle will suffer, many will die." Nathaniel paced, considering their options. "We could split the herd. Send a small group through as a diversion while the main herd follows an hour behind." "They'd slaughter the first group," Hazel protested. "Not if they had something else to worry about." He turned to the Apache guide. "Would Delshay's warriors be willing to create a distraction, not attack, just make Sullivan's men believe they are under threat?" The guide considered this, then nodded slowly. "For the woman who was shot defending her land. Yes, Delshay respects such courage. The plan they devised was risky but offered their best chance." Apache warriors would position themselves on the ridges opposite Sullivan's gunmen, making their presence known just before the cattle entered the canyon. Meanwhile, Nathaniel and 2 of the hands would circle behind the ambush position, cutting off any retreat. "I'm going with you," Hazel insisted when he outlined her role of staying with the main herd. "Hazel, no arguments," she said firmly. "These men are threatening my cattle, my future, and the man I care about. I won't sit back and watch." Something flickered in Nathaniel's eyes at her declaration. "The man you care about," a blush colored her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "Yes, though if he gets himself killed being stubborn, I might reconsider." His smile was brief but genuine. "All right, but you stay behind cover at all times." The next morning, they set their plan in motion. The small advance party of 30 cattle moved toward Willow Creek, driven by Jenkins and another hand. Right on schedule, Apache war cries erupted from the ridges as the herd entered the canyon. Sullivan's men, suddenly realizing they were potentially caught in a crossfire, shifted nervously, several abandoning their positions to seek better cover. In that moment of confusion, Nathaniel, Hazel, and the 2 hands crested the ridge behind them. "Drop your weapons." Nathaniel called out, his rifle trained on the nearest gunman. "You're surrounded." What followed was brief but violent. Most of Sullivan's men surrendered immediately, recognizing the hopelessness of their position. One, however, a hard-faced gunslinger with cold eyes swung his rifle toward Hazel. "Sullivan sends his regards, Harper," he snarled. Nathaniel's shot rang out simultaneously with the gunman's. The hired gun's bullet went wide as Nathaniel's found its mark, sending the man tumbling down the rocky slope. The remaining gunmen dropped their weapons, hands raised in surrender. "You tell Sullivan," Hazel called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "that the next time he sends men after me or my ranch, I won't be so merciful. And when we reach Prescott, every newspaper from here to Santa Fe will hear about Copper Canyon mining's tactics." With the ambush thwarted, the drive continued to Prescott without further incident. The cattle arrived in prime condition, drawing excellent prices from the eager buyers. As Hazel had predicted, the territorial newspapers were keenly interested in the story of corporate intimidation, attempted murder, and the brave stand of a female rancher. Sullivan himself was waiting at the Prescott stockyards, his usual composure noticeably absent as he watched Hazel count out the banknotes that would free her ranch from debt. "This isn't over, Harper," he said as she passed him on her way to the bank. "Copper Canyon mining doesn't forget its enemies." Nathaniel stepped forward, positioning himself protectively at Hazel's side. "Actually, Sullivan, I think it is over. Governor Triddle is a personal friend of mine. He's quite interested in the sworn statements we've collected about your company's methods." The blood drained from Sullivan's face. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Nathaniel smiled coldly. The governor's waiting for us at his office right now. Care to join us?" Sullivan's composure cracked completely. "You'll regret this," he hissed, before turning on his heel and storming away. Later that evening, after meeting with the governor and securing promises of an official investigation into Copper Canyon mining's practices, Hazel and Nathaniel found themselves alone for the first time in days. They walked through Prescott's town square, her arm linked through his, both savoring the sense of accomplishment and the promise of what lay ahead. "The ranch is safe now," she said, still hardly believing it. "And Sullivan will be too busy defending himself in court to cause any more trouble." "You did it," Nathaniel said warmly. "Your father would be proud." She stopped, turning to face him. "We did it. I couldn't have managed any of this without you, Nathaniel." In the soft glow of the street lamps, his eyes searched hers. "Does that mean you might be willing to keep me around?" "Permanently." Hazel's heart soared at his words. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Mr. Xavier?" He took both her hands in his. "I'm asking if you might consider making our partnership official. I know it hasn't been long, but when a man finds the right woman, especially one brave enough to face down gunmen and cattle barons, he'd be a fool to wait." "Then I suppose I should say yes," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Because I've found the right man, one brave enough to stand up for a stranger and kind enough to stay when she needed him most." 3 months later, as autumn painted the Arizona landscape in gold and crimson, Hazel Harper became Hazel Xavier in a simple ceremony on the porch of their ranch house. Martha Sullivan officiated, Sheriff Connolly stood as witness, and even Delshea attended with a small delegation of his people, honoring the couple who had earned his respect. The investigation into Copper Canyon mining revealed widespread corruption and intimidation. Sullivan fled the territory rather than face prosecution, and the company's operations were suspended pending reorganization under new leadership. The victory was sweet, but for Hazel and Nathaniel, it was merely the beginning of their story. Over the years that followed, Harper Ranch, now Xavier Ranch, prospered under their joint leadership. They expanded the operation, introducing new breeding stock and innovative ranching methods Nathaniel had learned during his travels. When copper was eventually mined from the North Ridge, it was done through a cooperative arrangement that preserved the land while still extracting its wealth. Their first child, a son they named James after Hazel's father, arrived on a snowy December night a year after their wedding. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later. Both children grew up strong and capable, learning the ways of the ranch just as Hazel had from her father. On the 10th anniversary of the day Nathaniel had saved Hazel's life in Springerville, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard while the setting sun bathed the land in golden light. "You ever regret it?" Hazel asked quietly. "Staying here instead of continuing your travels?" Nathaniel's arm tightened around her waist. "Not for a single moment," he replied, his voice sincere. "That bullet Whitaker fired might have been the luckiest thing that ever happened to me." She raised an eyebrow. "Luckiest for you?" "I'm the one who got shot. And I'm the one who found everything I never knew I was looking for," he countered, bending to kiss her softly. As twilight deepened around them and the first stars appeared in the eastern sky, they remained on the porch, content in the life. They'd built together a life that had begun with a single act of courage, when a woman refused to surrender what was rightfully hers, and a cowboy made sure justice was served.